I'm made in England, I call it my kingdom. She may let me down, she will never take a bow for me. So down the river, you scream till they hear ya, and I'm still standing proud, even as every town has fallen down to its knees. From the time when I was born in '89, I lived in a terraced house, 10th down the line. We didn't have much money, but we got on just fine. And knockdown ginger is what we played, just to pass the time. Every school dinners we had something called semolina. Your guess is good as mine, I don't know what it is either. And I can remember an explosion going off on the wall one day, and I was scared, and that's when Mum used to say, she would often tell me, don't be afraid. She would often say, it's just that things ain't great. And all through the night time, sleeping with the lights, it's just the way it was made, just the way it was made. She would often tell me, just be safe. She would often say, run, fight another day. Never went to church, but yes, sometimes we prayed. It's just the way I was made. I'm made in England, I call it my kingdom. She might let me down, she will never take a bow for me. So down the river, scream till they hear ya, and I'm still standing proud, even as every town has fallen down to its... This is the Fine Tracks here on Revival FM. This week's guest is Rev Calum Stark, who's minister at Avondale Old and Drumclog Parish. Calum, your seventh song choice was Missing Andy's The Way We Are Made. Why have you chosen this song for us this week?
Again, this wouldn't be my tune. And this song comes from a girl who we met in our ministry in Macduff called Robin. We met her when she was 15 years old. My wife taught her at Banff Academy, and she was the worst pupil that my wife had ever come across. And one day she was kicking a football outside our house. She was flicking fag butts across the road. She had her cap on and her hood over her head. And my wife said, that's her. She's called Robin, and she's the worst pupil that I've ever taught. And I remember seeing her. Long story short, a few months later, her dog gets into a fight with another dog. She puts her hand in between them, and this takes place right outside our house. There's blood everywhere. My wife goes out to her, brings her into our house to deal with the wound. And she didn't realize that in that moment, as she was inviting her into our house, that she was actually inviting her into our lives. And to cut a long story short, over a period of time, we saw God do the most amazing thing in this person's life. And she came to faith, basically, and she now works for Scripture Union.
Yes, that's amazing. So let's jump forward a wee bit. And then how did you decide to get into ministry?
Yeah, so I went into work and I started work in human resource management. I had a little bit of back and forth career-wise, but human resource management was what I kind of settled into. I got married in the year 2000. Funnily enough, my wife is from, her father is a minister in Northern Ireland. And when we got married, she didn't think that I was necessarily going to be a minister. We're in that difficult stage, actually. We've come out of university. We're a young couple with no family, and sometimes that's a difficult place to be. And we were finding that in churches, we were sort of getting missed. It was stuff for the mums and dads with young kids, and stuff for the university students. And we struggled a little bit, and we moved around churches. And then we found a church where we felt really at home, and we had other folks that were at our age and stage. Gradually became a bit more involved in the church, but our life was really settled. It was a lovely life living in Edinburgh. My wife was actually teaching at the school that I'd gone to. We would go and watch the rugby team playing on the Saturday morning. We would watch the academicals in the afternoon. Our social life was built around the school, and then we had our church friends as well. So we were really, really happy with how life was going. We actually had our life planned out that, our children, when we had them, would go to the school. We would live in Edinburgh. My family was there, and life was great. What actually happened was we went on holiday, went for a warm weather holiday. I think it was to Tenerife or something, just the two of us. And we kind of had this moment where we said, you know what, when we go on holiday, we've got all the time in the world, but we never really prioritize, you know, reading the Bible or reading a Christian book. We might have a little snatch of quiet time. Let's actually be intentional this holiday, and let's go to the bookshop, get a book before you go, and let's choose a Bible study that you're not doing, something a little bit different, and actually just have a focus when we're on holiday. So we did that, and we had this sense of, when we came back, of a total reawakening of faith. And it was on one hand quite exciting. We're saying, listen, we feel we want to get more involved in church. We a sense of we want to serve more. On the other hand, there was this challenge that was quite uncomfortable. And the challenge was, the phrase that I used was Christian cruise control. That we were going through life, and it was almost as if we're saying, Lord, we'll serve you. We'll do whatever you want, as long as it's in Edinburgh. And we realized just how ridiculous that was. But it was hugely challenging. And at this point, we started to meet up with a lady in the church who became our mentor, and we met with her regularly, and we sort of updated on what was happening in our lives. And the pattern that started to come through was, we sensed that God was calling us to give up Edinburgh.
That must have been quite a shock, I suppose, to the system, that you thought that was where it was going to be, and then God was telling you something different. Yeah.
So, you know, we've kind of got our life mapped out, and suddenly it's kind of like, well, no. By this stage, I think we're having children, yeah, and we've had our first boy, and he's going to the school actually, and we're sort of going through, but we've got this sense of we've got to give up Edinburgh. And at that same stage, we're becoming more involved in church. Before that, I would have been someone who, you know, I've got my Christian faith, but I'm quite happy just hanging out at the back of church. And, you know, the minister's looking for people to help do stuff. I'm happy to sit back and see who else will go first, because there are people who are much better at that stuff than me. My wife would have been more involved. She would have led kids clubs and stuff like that. But I would kind of sit at the back. And I remember getting asked to do a reading in church and being like, oh, you know, because I would naturally be a bit of an introvert, so that's kind of not what I would incline myself towards. So being really nervous doing that kind of thing. But here's what's happening. Things are moving. We're involved in the house groups. We're starting to lead it. I'm starting to step forward and do a bit of that stuff. Set up a men's group with one of my pals, because we noticed that a lot of the guys we'd been friends with who were in the Christian Union had dropped off once we got into working life. So we set up this men's group that started to grow. Some people who had no interaction with faith previously were joining it. I'm doing my HR stuff, and I'm finding myself conflicted, because people were starting to come to me on a sort of pastoral basis, and then I've got managers coming to me saying, how can we sack that person who's off sick all the time? And I'm finding myself like, well, here's the strategy of what we should do, is do the sickness absence, then the performance manager. I can't remember what it all was now, but there was a certain strategy you could follow. And I'm feeling torn, because I'm building relationships, but aware of professional boundaries with individuals. And then the managers are saying, right, how can we deal with that person? So this is me starting to feel uncomfortable in the workplace, getting more and more involved in church life, and sensing we've got to give up Edinburgh. And we get to a point where I say to my wife, I think I'm being called into the ministry. And she says, I think you are as well. The only thing is, Calum, I don't know if you can preach. And I went, neither do I.
Wow, that's amazing how there's just that sort of natural progression into that sort of leadership role. So what was the kind of steps that you took to check if you could preach?
Yeah, well, what happened was I kind of did an inquiry into the Church of Scotland, met a couple of ministers, had some chats, and then they had a process that was in place, and it was already running for this year's potential candidates for the ministry. But they said, you know what, we'll extend it for you. You're starting a couple of months late, but we'll let you in. You're going to a placement starting in a couple of weeks' time at this venue. And I'm like, okay. I turn up at the venue and meet the minister, and he just wasn't messing around at all. He says, listen, I've had inquirers who've come and gone and have messed me about. You need to turn up every Sunday. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to turn up every Sunday. He says, I don't want to waste any time here. And I said, well, I don't actually either. And he goes, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw you in at the deep end and we'll see if you sink or swim. And I went, do you know what? It's not really my character to be like that. But yeah, let's just do it. Because if this isn't the right thing, I don't want to waste anyone's time either.
What was that like then, that being chucked in the deep end?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is really pushing me to my limits because I am naturally an introvert. I am not the sort of person who's going to stand up and just give a speech. So here we are. You're doing your first sermon, Calum, and it's in front of a congregation that's pretty traditional. And it's a no mistakes exercise in a fairly affluent part of Edinburgh. So I remember walking up those stairs thinking, you know, I'm a quaking wreck here. But that sense of God's presence with you, and almost a sense of, I will give you what you need. And I really had to call out for that because I knew that I didn't have the smarts in the locker to do it. I really had an acute awareness of it. Now, this was my big blocker going through the process, and is actually an important part of my story, was as I was in church and I'm weighing up, listen, I'm going in this process, I was actually quite embarrassed telling people. And I was going, I feel really embarrassed. Who am I to think that I should be the guy going into the ministry? This is embarrassing. I could name about 15 guys in the church that I think should be ahead of me in the queue. So one Sunday I was at my home church and there was a lay reader who was preaching, went through for tea and coffee afterwards. And I opened up to him. I said, listen, I'll just tell you the truth. He says, I hear you go for the ministry. I'm like, listen, I'll tell you the truth. I'm actually feeling a bit embarrassed. I feel there are other people who've got way more experience, of leading Bible studies, of speaking at events. Who am I? And he said to me, I'm not a minister, and I'm one of those guys you're talking about. I can lead Bible studies at the drop of a hat. You've seen me preach today. I've been doing this all my life. He says, Calum, I have not been called, and that's why I'm not there. I've been called into industry. And actually, in my job in industry, I find I'm looking for God's help all the time. He says, you're going to be looking for God's help, and that's why you've been called. And honestly, when he said that, it was just so freeing. And it helped me. So I'm walking up the steps to deliver the first sermon, and I'm thinking, yeah, this isn't me. I am dependent upon God. I don't have the skills to do it. Here we go. And actually what I found was that's the place where you do grow, whether it's preaching or whether it's leading Sunday school. The thing that sometimes you feel you don't want to do, that you're going to have to depend on God's hand to get you through, when you step into that, that's where the growth really comes.
Rent Collective with Immeasurably More is our 8th song choice this week. Calum, why have you chosen this for us as part of your 10?
This song reminds me, I'm still in Macduff here, but it reminds me of one of the most beautiful views in Macduff, walking down towards the coffee morning, and in the distance I can see waves crashing in to the harbour, and there's just that reminder of God's presence. And this song particularly just brought me real comfort. After we'd started a men's breakfast alpha course, and we managed to get 5 men who went to the coffee morning, managed to say, come on guys, let's do an alpha together. And after week 3, I think we were down to 2 men. After week 4, 1. Davy, the fisherman, who was a retired fisherman. And he basically did a one-on-one alpha with myself. And then there was another guy who was making the team toast. I think by the end of it, he came through on it as well. And basically what happened was Davy, just in the most simple way, came to faith. And it started because he had to come to church for 4 weeks. He says, I have to come to church. My granddaughter's been baptized. The other one's playing in the praise band. And there were all these things. And it was a joke. It was an absolute joke. And he came to church. He then did the alpha. He came to faith. And then tragically, he took unwell. And he'd chosen his suit that he was going to be baptized in. And he ended up going into hospital. And he knew he was going to pass away, and it was really sad. And what he said was this. He said, but I've got my faith. he says, "You're not going to baptize me in that suit now. You're going to have to bury me in it." And I tell you, it was such a hard funeral. I hadn't known him for a long time, but when it had been in the way it had happened and we'd seen him come to faith, it was moving and warming, but really upsetting. And I just remember having that song as I was walking down and saying, "Yes, God, you're the one who does immeasurably more than we can understand."
More than all we ask, than all we seek, all our hopes and dreams, you are immeasurably more than we can know, than we can pray, all our words can say, you are immeasurably more. There's nothing greater than your love. You're more than we can imagine. There's nothing sweeter on this earth. You're more than we can imagine. Our hearts respond to who you are. It's you, oh Lord, that we adore. You are more. You are more. You're more than we can imagine. You are more. You are more. You are more, you're more than we can imagine.